Thank you for coming, and thank you to all those students who thought that this was a good way to occupy the past week or two of my life in thinking about it. Now, it's tricky to know what to do in a session like this because some of you will know shed loads about sustainability, and for some people it will be one of those words you keep here getting mentioned, but you're not really sure what it's about. And so I'm sorry if I do fall between two posts. I thought about talking about the engagement work our students have done. But I decided not to because rather belatedly I gave my inaugural lecture in November and that was videoed and all the rest of it. And so that's available online. So if you want to think about what students in this university and in this city are doing to change the city, and it's staggering, then do go and find that online and have a listen if you haven't had enough of hearing from me by the end of the next 40 minutes. I'm going to do something slightly different today, which focuses on another bit of the story. Now, the title I picked was, What is a Sustainable Future? Well, the first way I could look at that would be to bombard you with reports and definitions and analyses. But a key theme of what I'm going to be saying is that you get bombarded with that. You get X says this, Y says that. But actually sustainability is about what you can say as individuals, what your understanding of the future is. Nonetheless, for form's sake really, I thought I'd better put up a couple of useful starting points for those people who are perhaps not familiar with the idea of sustainability and what it means. For most of us, the starting point is the Brundtland, the World Commission on Sustainable Development definition from before most of you in this room were born. And that's about a future where we meet the needs of today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So it's about intra-generational equity, fairness across the planet now, sustainability between those on the planet now, but also ensuring we don't just guzzle up resources so that the future has fewer choices. But that's a very anthropocentric definition. It's about our capacity to exploit the world. And it was great for its time, but it looks rather dated because much of our concern now is about the world's capacity to cope with us, as opposed to our ability to exploit the world. The one on the right I use quite a lot because I think it does take the story forward. And this is Kate Raworth. She's an economist. Nevertheless, this is a really useful, it's called the Raworth's donut. And what she's saying is, look, the planet, I don't like the phrase carrying capacity, and there's a whole sort of sub-story about why that's not a good phrase. But what Kate Raworth identifies is that there's an environmental ceiling. There's a level of exploitation of the planet beyond which the planet simply can't cope with us anymore. And that's the environmental element of sustainability. And for many of us who came to this from the environmental movement, that was our focus of attention. But actually most of my colleagues in law, that's not the bit of the story they see most or first. What they see first is this inner edge. And this inner edge is an important part of the story. Yes, we could live within the carrying capacity of the planet, but if that requires us to behave in ways that don't deliver food and housing and education for the people of the planet, then is it a life we want to live? So that we've got to find a way. We've got to travel in what she calls a safe and just space for us, where the planet can cope with us, but what we are taking from the planet is something we're prepared to live with. So that's what I'm talking about, that green space. Now, very often when I'm doing this in workshops with people, the first thing we get them to do is do a drawing. It's wonderful. You get a group of academics in a workshop about how to do sustainability education, and you say, here's some coloured pencils, do a drawing. And half the academics in the room go, we haven't done drawings since we were 9. But I want you to, I haven't bought pens and pencils for you today, but I want you to think. In your mind, have a picture of what you think a sustainable future will be, okay? While I'm talking, just get a picture up in your mind of what it would look like. And that's important. I'm not going to give you, if you came along thinking I was going to tell you what a sustainable future is, well, you're going to be disappointed. The point about sustainable futures is that there isn't one. There's lots of them. It's a multiverse. It's a plurality of slightly different... Everybody in this room will have a slightly different perspective on what would make a sustainable future, and what the most important bit of that picture would be. And that's not that you don't really know what it means. It's because that's what it is about. We are not one monolith that gets moved forward together. We're lots of different people having slightly different takes. But interestingly, if you do that with what I'm going to call a Western audience, a first world, second world, developed world audience, there are certain features that you probably had. How many of you had trees and nice countryside in your picture? Yeah. Usually people draw wind turbines because they're easier to draw than solar panels. How many of you had some sort of friendly energy supply in your... Yeah, you see? You're performing exactly to the stereotype. Okay, how many of you had happy families with bicycles? Because we're not going to be driving cars. Oh, actually, very few of you. That's normally a common feature of people's drawings. You're unusual. It's normally happy families riding bicycles. Techie transportation that's eco-friendly? A few of you? Yep. That's more mixed. Some people go down the techie route. Some people don't have tech in their picture. Most people have some sort of sustainable housing. Now, that's a particularly wacky version with permaculture, with growing your own food on the flats that you're in. But most people have some sort of picture of more sustainable ways of living, which quite often, surprisingly, are high-rise. And then a few have some sort of sustainable industry, some sort of blob that counts as factory with wind power and solar panels and so on. We are remarkably consistent. Different emphasis. You saw different hands went up at different times, but all broadly in the same family of pictures. So actually, everybody in this room has a sense of what a sustainable future would look like. Maybe a bit fuzzy around the edges, maybe varied, but it's broadly somewhere in that ballpark. So what do we then do when we start talking about it? Don't. The first thing we say to people is, don't do this, don't do that, you mustn't do that, it's bad for the planet. I've seen people say to elderly folk, I'm elderly, I've seen people say to elderly folk, your children or your grandchildren live in America, but don't you dare fly to America to see them. Oh, come on. Do we want to live in a world where people can't go and see their children and grandchildren? The word don't is, I've seen people in tears because they've been told, don't, it's bad, it's wicked to fly to see your children and grandchildren. We've got to find a different way to talk about it. The second thing we do when we finish saying don't is we start listing all the problems. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And the list gets longer and longer and longer. And what we're ending up doing is spreading doom and gloom. Fear, doom, gloom, problems, Extinction Rebellion. It's a fantastic movement, but the label Extinction Rebellion is really, really depressing and negative. And there's a lot of research that says that we can only handle a certain amount of problems. And what we do is we filter. And if what we're doing is presenting to people a list of environmental problems as long as your arm, or social sustainability, social justice problems as long as your arm, they're going to filter a lot of them out. And they may filter out the messages that you think are most important. So fear and gloom, and you don't get out of bed because you think the world's going to hell in a handcart. That's not going to get you mobilised to do something. So one of the things we do when we get fed up with the fact that people aren't taking this seriously is we're academics. We bombard them with graphs and data. This is the only graph you're going to see. This is going to be a largely graph-free lecture, and that's only there. It's a perfectly good graph. It's a really interesting graph. But again, there is a huge amount of data that says those of us who are going to be convinced by the evidence are convinced. And what we need to do is to think about the ways to convince people who aren't convinced by data, who are convinced by stories and narratives. So I've been critical of a lot of the ways in which we talk about a sustainable future. So, don't. Not good news. It's good for you. How many of you were told, eat your greens? I bet you get told, eat your greens, it's good for you, Abigail. I bet you do. And we all ignored those it's good for you, or we ought to's. But even if people were to act on them, there's a problem in us trying to deliver a sustainable future through don'ts and fear and negativity. Because the means are as important as the end. If we want to build a sustainable future, if we want to encourage people to work together in partnership, then we've kind of got to do this the right way. And I'm going to sum up the right way as the 4 F's. You can probably add further F's of your own. I'm not responsible for that. Family, future, for, and fun. Family. Now, this phrase sums up a piece of work that's been done, particularly in America, where you have this problem with the Republicans, a lot of Republican voters not accepting climate change as even a reality, never mind what they're going to do about it. And that research has looked at what messages work with Republicans and what don't. And there's quite a lot of it about. And it tells us some important things about our communication about sustainability. We pick and choose which threats we're going to respond to. Bombard people with threats, and they may say, oh, I'm much more worried about Brexit. We seek information that confirms what we already believe. I'm a politician in my spare time. I was taught many years ago that if I go to the public and say, you really ought to care about this, I'm asking them to do two things, and therefore vote for me. I'm asking them to do 2 things. To change what they think is important, to sharing my view of what's important in the world, and then ask them to vote for me in consequence. I've lost them at the first hurdle. What you have to do is find out what's worrying people, and then tackle that problem. And it may be that what you're worrying about actually relates to that. So play into people's narratives. We reject solutions that conflict with our values. Don't want to know, don't want to rethink my world value set, thank you. And there's even evidence that if we tell the story wrongly, it's not merely that we fail, but that we actually set back the cause of building a more sustainable future. We build up alienation. And at the bottom of the slide, there's some language there that some of you will go, oh, I wouldn't talk about sustainability like that. But the evidence is that for a lot of the people who are not yet convinced about the importance of creating a sustainable future, this is the language that works for them. Talking about family, protecting your family, handing stuff on to your children, that original Brundtland phrase is actually really powerful for a lot of neocons. Prudence. People talk about national debt and how important it is not to saddle the future with a big national debt. Well, hell's bells, destroying the planet might be seen as the biggest national debt of them all. So let's talk into that language. Oh, national pride. Some of that language that you've heard used in the last few years around Brexit, about our capacity to tackle this problem and the importance of preserving our way of life, actually can come from this. And then finally, you're seeing some of this language shift in relation to air pollution. There's a really big, even the Daily Mail and the Daily Express is on song about air pollution. Because it plays to that sector of the British public. And that's true globally. Whereas climate change doesn't have the same resonance. So the first thing is, can we think, under the guise of the word family, about language? Can we talk about the future? Not about problems, not about the current problems. A really strong part of sustainable futures and sustainability is not talking about today's problems. It's not solving today's problems. It's building the future that Abigail wants. It's building that future. And here's the UN's bash at doing that. These are the Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the UN. There's 17 of them, and at surface level, they're just superficial, bland, of course, motherhood and apple pie. Behind that, there are targets and much more detail. But for this purpose today, what this is doing is saying there are 17 things that we want to reach that will make our future more sustainable. They're not saying what's wrong, they're saying what needs to be right. You look at those. Everybody in this room will have different ones on that list of 17 that resonate with them. And you do an exercise with people, you say, where you listen and you say, which ones seem most important to you? And which ones could you do something about? And different people will pick different ones and will identify what they can do as a small step towards them. And that is such a positive way of trying to get people to think about what I can do to create the future I want. And so that's core to what I'm saying today is about building positive futures. Third, I use the word for. We're really good at saying what we're against. That bottom poster is another one of the Extinction Rebellion posters, but it's phrased differently. It's phrased in what we are for. And the rest of this slide is a website from a think tank, entirely talking about what we can do, not what we can't do. What we're for, not what we're against. And then finally, fun. You do not get people to do stuff to change the planet if what you do is say, on top of everything you're doing, you've got to do this as well. Most of us are up to about there. So when somebody comes and says we've got to do something else, there's just no space, no capacity in what we're doing. But most people are doing something. It's rare that you find somebody who doesn't recycle or doesn't have a moment's qualm when they're out shopping about ethical shopping. Everybody is doing it. It may be tiny, but we're all doing something. And the university's approach to this has been celebrate what's going on. Find out what people are doing and celebrate what they're doing. And then say, that's brilliant you're doing that, what about doing a wee bit more? And that buys people into a narrative. And then say, you choose what you do. I'm not going to tell you what to do next. You choose what you want to do next. But above all, you make it fun. So I can think of people who've done huge amounts of work as students for sustainability in this university who first went along to an event because there was free ice cream. Okay? Yep. Like it or not, sustainability has a bit of a hair shirt reputation. That sustainability is boring and grim and sort of sludge grey. And we need to get away from that. We need to make sure it's fun. So, how can the university community contribute as a community to building that sustainable future? The single most important impact on the planet this university has is you lot, the students in this room. Every year, thousands of you go out into the world with a lifetime's footprint ahead of you. But even whilst you're here, you are 10% of the population of this city between here and UWE. 10% of the population of this city. If you got out there and made a difference, we could change the city. We could make it a more sustainable city. And globally, I looked up the OECD figures. Which country do you think has the highest graduate population of the world in percentage terms? China obviously has more than anybody else, but in percentage terms. Which country has the highest percentage of graduates? Anybody want to give a call out? No. No. Both in the top 10. Canada. 56% of the adult working age population of Canada have a higher degree. Now, if we get the university story right, we're talking to 56% of the population of that city, of that country. That's a phenomenal figure. But instead, here's a quote from 1994, but sadly it's still largely true, that what we do is we turn out graduates who are ecologically illiterate, who are sustainability illiterate. They may be brilliant at their discipline, but they may not know the big picture. As Stephen Sterling has said, what's going on with us as universities? We say this is a huge problem. Most academics in this university are doing research that in some way contributes towards attaining those sustainable development goals. There's very little research going on here that doesn't have a role somewhere along the line in those sustainable development goals. Yet, we kind of carry on as normal. We teach the same things on the same syllabus pretty much as we've done for the last 20 or 30 years. And there's an issue there. So, the university's work around sustainability and sustainable futures is about saying we want the university and the student union to become hubs of sustainability so that students in this room leave as part of the solution, not as a continuing part of the problem. But to do that, we've got to rethink how we see education. And instead of, most academics traditionally think about that bit. classes, seminars, exams, all that stuff. But actually, a student's experience is made up of the physical stuff, the fact the radiators in this building are still on, so I'm in short sleeves in March, ridiculous. The informal curriculum, what you do in your spare time, and the formal curriculum, and the community in which you're operating. And we have to learn to think about the educational experience in that totality. And that's the tricky one for us. But it's not only that we have to think about the education experience. That was a drawing developed at Bristol University by staff and students together, thinking about what we needed to do to education. And then equally, this was developed by people in the student union, one of whom is here today, and more of Hannah in a moment, saying, look, learning is just, the formal knowledge base is just a part of the story. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition to save the world. The next step, and one that we all do, is we act. We do stuff. We recycle, we shop ethically, whatever. We turn lights off, whatever. We do stuff ethically. But that's not enough. I love this drawing because it illustrates that there's always more that we can do. And the next step is that we need to engage. We need to start to do things in sustainability projects and talk about it to other people and discover how their picture is different from ours. This is part of the educational process. This is not about me asking you to go campaigning. It's about saying part of learning is about discovering other people's pictures and how they're different from you and engaging in doing stuff. And then finally, getting to the position that students are creating and leading their own campaigns. And there's been a lot of that being done in this university. Now I'm going to whiz you through the next slides. They're there for anybody who wants to look afterwards in more depth. Key, though, to that process is that too often in our education, we spend time making you read what X and Y, usually dead, usually white, usually male, say, and not enough time in getting you to say, well, given that, what can I say? And a whole religious movement was founded on the back of this bloke, George Fox, in his 20s, so not much older than our students, just saying, look, Christ says this, the apostles say that, what can you say? I'm a Quaker, so kind of that's a really important phrase to me. But more generally, what can you say? As the job of education is about changing students, about helping you to be creative and to find your story, but it's also, there's a deal coming back the other way, that we need students to change us. Because you are different to me, you do see a different story. So what is this education as if a sustainable future mattered? UNESCO, we're not talking now about wacky marginal organisations, we're talking about UNESCO saying that education for sustainability, okay, it's about knowledge, but it's also about attitudes, skills and perspectives that enables you to act for the benefit of yourselves and the rest of the planet now and in the future. It's about skilling you up to be part of creating that sustainable future. And here's a poster again produced by Bristol students. It's a big long poster, so it comes in 2 slides. The top half is the stuff, the knowledge stuff that you might acquire from a lot of your courses. But the bottom reminds us that it's not just about knowledge, it's about skills, it's about attributes. Do you get the opportunities to develop teamwork skills? Do you get the chance to work with people from other disciplines? You know, I'm a lawyer. We see the world through one prism. I'm not going to be the solution to lots of things. Lawyers, on the whole, don't solve things. We're there to help people with solutions. I need to be able to talk to engineers or scientists or creative folks about how we deliver it together. So I need a set of skills that enable me to do that. But I also need a set of values. And for many years, universities shied away from values, and we don't do values. We're value-free, we're neutral. Well, actually, we're not, and we never were. And this university, in its Bristol Futures programme, is quite explicit that the Bristol Futures programme is about a set of values that we want our graduates to go out into the world with. That's not indoctrinating you before somebody starts saying, oh, is that indoctrinating people to be pro-European or whatever. No, it's about a set of values that we want you to develop. So we're not teaching you values. What we're trying to do is to create a space. So you're all going to come into this space, again, drawing from a Bristol student. You're going to come in through different doors into this space. And you'll have different journeys through the space, and you go out different doors. But what we want you to do in that space, whilst you're here, is to learn how to make transformations, how to make a difference in the world. It's not only that we want you to, there's some knowledge and there's some skills and values, there's also some stuff about how we teach. That learning has to be different, with students co-creating learning, not people to whom we impart learning as passive recipients, but people who help us to shape the curriculum and what goes into it. And it has to be future thinking, the world we want, not the problems we've got. I'm going to skip over some of the others, but you can see the picture that how we teach has to be different. But we, the academics in this room, we're the problem, by and large. We are, like it or not, we're in disciplinary silos. We've taught ourselves how to think about things in a particular way, and I'm sorry, it can be difficult for us to unthink. That's where you as students come in. You arrive at university creative, but as she did this to a lecture theatre this size of academics and said, we arrive creative, tell me, are we more or less creative by the end of year one of our studies? And that room full of academics, we all went a bit pale. Because the reality is, there's a lot about the way we run education that gets rid of that creativity or stifles it or packages it or manages it. And actually, the people who can help us to get out of those silos and can help us to unteach ourselves and see things differently are students. That's not comfortable, but the reality is that coming in with your excitement and your energy and your creativity, you can do something for us. And it has to be, we think, student-led, a lot of this change. Partly because you don't know what's impossible. People my age go, oh, well, we tried it in 1947 and it didn't work, so there's no point in trying it again. Whereas students don't have that set of blinkers. But also, it's a better learning experience for you if you've been involved in shaping what it is we learn and how we learn it. You become co-creators of your educational space, not merely passive recipients. And thirdly, frankly, there's more of you. So it has to be helpful to have you at the centre of this. Now, it may take the form of the climate strike. That's last week's climate strike on College Green. Or it may take the form of people sitting in a room, again, this is a Bristol University slide, people sitting in a room thinking about curriculum change. And for the last bit of this, I'm going to ask you to think about curriculum change and what you study as students. Now, Hannah, waggle your hand, Hannah, there. When she was working in the student union, she's now gone over to the dark side and works for us in the university, led a team that produced this guide for students on how to change the curriculum. Primarily around sustainability, but it works for any curriculum change. Start by knowing what sustainability is about, the social, the economic, and the environmental. Then think about your discipline and what your discipline brings to the table. What is it that your discipline can contribute towards creating that more sustainable future? Then audit your curriculum to find out what's being done. Baseline. What are they doing at the minute? Are they doing as much as we think we're doing or not? Then find out what people want. And then present your ideas and your evidence. And if you want to do this within your curriculum area, Hannah still is the person to turn to for some advice. When you're doing that, when you're thinking about your discipline, an important thing is to think about the language of your discipline. I'm a lawyer. Lawyers don't do sustainability. We're only just getting our heads around the language. We do social justice. Yes, core law thing. Sustainability, what's that? Isn't that bunny rabbits and trees? We don't do that. But we do social justice. And actually, a lot of what we talk about in social justice is really sustainability stuff. Medics, sustainability is not a word that generally gets used. Ethics is the language. So our previous Vice-Chancellor, who was a medic, we could talk to him about ethics because he understands ethics and he understood that what we're talking about is ethical. but sustainability was not such natural language for him. Engineers, it's systems thinking. That tends to be the language that resonates with engineers. So what's the language in which to talk about sustainability within your discipline? Find that out as core. Then audit your curriculum. There's a university site, details in the booklet that Hannah produced, that tells you about every programme and every unit in every programme. And this is a piece of work that actually Hannah and another student did some years ago now, but I'm using it to illustrate. They took every unit taught in every programme, in every school, in every faculty in this university, and analysed the presence of sustainability, or education for sustainable development as we were calling it at the time, in the units. And so we looked at, does it turn up in the core curriculum? Is it unavoidable that you're going to encounter sustainability during your studies? Some, but not a lot. And then we said, well, is there a sort of an optional area? If you're a historian, can you pursue optional units that take you into a sustainability pathway? And we mapped that. And then we looked at open units, things outside your curriculum, as the other way you can get access to sustainability learning. So mapping, and then we gave this mapping to the departments. And a lot of the departments went, we do more than that. Do you indeed? Well, we can't find any evidence of it in your programme and unit specs. Oh, I'm sure we do. Well, could we have a look at your handouts? We found a lot of people are teaching about sustainability, but aren't saying, look, this is really about sustainability. It's part of a big picture. And if we don't say that, we're missing out on helping students to make the joins and make the connections. Once you know what's going on, ask and listen to the stakeholders, the current students, the current staff, employers. You might think, oh, employers are bound to be boring and fuddy-duddy and old, but actually, very often we've found they are the key people who are saying to us, I want graduates who get sustainability. I had an ex-Bristol student in my office last Friday who does banking finance. And she said at an international level, you just massive arrangements. And she said a very high percentage of her work is about sustainability assessments. And that's not just financial sustainability, that's looking at climate change and social justice and saying, how do I make sure these clients are safe? And then work out what that means for your school, and then talk to the school about it. And when you do that, when you listen to students, I'm not going to dwell on this, I'm not going to leave it up for long, but you get a picture of people saying, there's quite a lot of it about, but it's quite often token. It needs to be academically rigorous, it needs to be interdisciplinary. You get an agenda for how we can do better, and we need you to tell us that. But also out of that, you get all sorts of ideas. And I'm going to give you just one. You can read the other one on the screen. Again, this is one of the things Hannah did. We have a programme on international development. And one of the things that the students on the international development course do is they write business plans for NGOs as part of helping them to understand how NGOs across the planet function. And they were writing hypothetical business plans. Just outside the door, there's a city full of NGOs. Many of whom don't have a business plan, or if they did, it was written years ago and it's rubbish. Hannah simply put out an email call across the city in one email to a network of organisations saying, any NGOs who could do with a new business plan? 44 NGOs came forward and said, yes, please. And that meant the students then were writing real business plans with real people that changed those organisations. And we've got the evidence of some of the things the groups were able to do as a result. But it also changed the students' experience, because they suddenly discovered that business plans aren't sort of theoretical bits of study. They involve messy stuff like people. And people not wanting something in, even if you think it's a good idea. And it changed the experience. Now, any of you in this room can think about your curriculum and think about where those opportunities are. So it might be around projects. It might be about how you link the formal curriculum and the informal curriculum. I often say to mathematicians, if you really can't think of how to make the maths program more sustainable in your university, well, what about making sure there's more extracurricular stuff going on in your school that could make those links? Maybe you could promote the Sustainable Futures online course. There's a video there, it's a horrible link, but if you Google YouTube for Sustainable Futures trailer, you get the video up. You could sign up for the next running of the online course that the university runs about sustainable futures. You could promote that to your friends. You could link people to the amazing work that's going on in the informal curriculum. You could think about, for example, how your academic disciplinary societies make a difference. And big change can be made if you find the right place, the right touch point. And on this slide, I've got, I don't know whether the Postcrash Economics example is an example of success or of failure. This is after the 2008 economic crash. Students at Manchester University, their curriculum was all, in economics, was all about Chicago School economics, the economics that had created the crash. And they said, we actually want to learn the alternatives. We want to learn some green economics. We want to learn some Keynesian economics. We want some post-crash economics. We want some economics as if the planet mattered. And that's fantastic. But what they found initially was a reluctance amongst their staff. And I don't think you'd get that reluctance here. What they did, though, to bridge the gap initially, was they set up their own lecture series of the people they wanted to hear about around economics as if the planet mattered. And that led to changes in their curriculum. So it ends up being a success. So what are you going to do around your subject and your curriculum? Education as if... Now, the reason why I sort of worry that that's a bit of a failure is because there was a confrontation and it became a really big national scandal and there were demos and so on. And that isn't really a sustainable way to do change. The way to do change is to talk to people, to be in partnership, to remember that sometimes when boring old folk like me say, well, I'm really sorry, you've got to know this to be safe professionally, we might have some experience to come to the table that says, you really do need to know this, as well as the exciting stuff about how to change the world. So can I just accept that wisdom may come in multiple forms? Now, I've not talked today about what we've been doing as a university with other universities around engaging students directly in city transformation, because I did that for my inaugural and I didn't want to kind of say the same story again, even if slightly differently. But those of you who came to the inaugural will be familiar with this slide. And I do want to come to this slide because to wind up with, because it tells an important story. Anybody in this room old enough to have the vaguest idea who these two groups of people are? If you've been to one of my lectures before and seen the slide, shush. Okay. These are Spitfire pilots from the Second World War. Average age of a Spitfire pilot in the Second World War was 21. Some reports say 22, but 21, 22, depending on whose statistics you look at. Now, what we find when we're going out into the community, and to some extent you can see when I talk to you other universities about how they might change their curriculum, people going, they're young, they're inexperienced. We offer young students to work in voluntary sector groups, and quite often we get they could come and do some coppicing or some hard work, you know, because you're fit and you're young and you can do the physical stuff. Or they say, well, we need some stewards at an event, and they'd be really good as stewards in their T-shirts, like the Bob T-shirts at events. Okay? We didn't say to these guys, oh, would you mind doing a bit of doorkeeping or a bit of physical help? You know, that's the Battle of Britain pilots. Now, okay, you may say, yeah, but Battle of Britain pilots needed physical stamina and they needed quick reactions, and that's what young people do. So that still reflects the stereotype that older folk have. This guy, though, is Guy Gibson. He was 23 when he was put in charge of forming the Dam Buster Squadron. And the Dam Buster Squadron organised the raids on the Ruhr dams that effectively you were sending a large percentage of your squadron to their death. and he had to train and mobilise and motivate a squadron of men to do that, and he was 23. Nowadays, there's a real risk that what we do to somebody like Guy Gibson is say, oh, you're 23, well, would you mind doing some doorkeeping, please? As opposed to, would you form a squadron and do this historic event? So somewhere along the line, we, as older folk, and there are some of us older folk in the room, have created limitations about what we see the younger people in the room as being able to do. We see you as objects of attention. Yeah? You are objects of need and of attention, not of people who can contribute in your own right. And how many of you have heard the phrase, well, they're the future citizens of this country? That's a phrase you often hear about younger people, that you're future citizens. You're actually not. You're citizens now. You're not in some waiting room for getting into life and being able to contribute. You are now citizens, and you can be contributing now. But part of the problem is we still require you to map into our rules. And you see the world differently. I'm going to illustrate that and pretty much bring it to an end by telling you two stories, one of which is a personal story, and one of which is an institutional story. When I was a kid, my gran was born before the car was invented. And so on a Sunday, if my father said, should we go out? My gran would say, are we taking the car? Because she had in her mind her map of the world that she'd formed of places to go on a Sunday. And then the car had come along, and she'd sort of acquired a second map of places you can go with the car. They weren't one integrated map, they were two maps. I never knew the world before car. So I had one map that was integrated. Now, most of us in this room who are over 35 are in Gran's position. We have the map of the world that we kind of formed when we were first trying to work out what the world looked like. You know, the map that Abigail's currently forming of what the world looks like. And then we kind of bolted on bits. And occasionally we've rubbed bits out and changed them, but very often we've sort of got bolt-on and PSs and bits of post-it notes and so on our map of the world. The people who've got the integrated map of the world as she is now are the students in this room. You've got an integrated picture. You've got a joined-up picture. We can't create it. I cannot create an integrated picture. I'm always going to have that messy sort of adaptation. I need you to use your integrated picture to change my world. And I'll give you the second story is one example of that to wind up. A medical student in this university. Modern-day slavery. She worked out in her mind that there's one group of people that get to see modern-day slaves, and that's doctors. Because when your slave is ill, you do actually have to get them better, because they're no value if they're ill. So doctors have a better chance of spotting modern-day slavery than many other people. But there was no guidance to GPs on how to recognise when somebody presented at your surgery that this might be an issue. And she worked with doctors and with experts to develop a sort of toolkit for GPs that was piloted and rolled out in Bristol and then has been used elsewhere. Now, that's an example. In my mind, I have what doctors do, and I have modern-day slavery as a modern phenomenon. It's horrible. But it takes a student to have a single integrated map to say, oh, hang on a bit, there's a join there. Now, you won't see that join, but each of you might be seeing a join that nobody else has seen. And so what we want you to do is to change us. We want you to find out what it is you can say and then change us. And at the end of the day, if we can't let you change us and what we teach you and how we teach you, then we haven't a hope of you going out and changing the world. We've got to allow you to change us. Not least because people like me are getting old. And if you lot don't learn how to be change makers and change the world, who's going to be doing it when we're just too old to be doing it? So, I hope I've given you some challenges about what you could do with your curriculum to make a difference so that we are producing more sustainability-friendly graduates in the law school, in the university. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Professor Willmore for that really inspiring lecture. We do have about 5 to 10 minutes for some questions. Obviously, we're aware that if you have something to go at 2 o'clock, you're more than welcome to head off now if you need to. But are there any questions in the room to start with?
Dead silence.
Hello, yes.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you. That was really inspiring. And I've got a question. I'm a PhD student here and at Exeter University. And I don't...
You have to shout for everybody in the room, although the mic's picking you up for the recording.
Let me try and avoid the child falling over. So I'm a student here doing a PhD and at Exeter University. And I don't feel like I'm being asked to take responsibility for my own work and my own contribution. And as someone who works on climate change, I'm a PhD student doing a climate change PhD. I'm anxious about climate change, and I want to know sort of why is the university not saying you need to think about the carbon footprint of your work? And I know that is taking a step away from what we've talked about today, but it's something that I feel is we've got a room of experts, a world of experts at the university, and they're not kind of saying that we have to do this, all of us, now.
I think the university does try to promote sustainability, but as with all of us, it's patchy. I am boiling by this radiator. So there is patchy stuff. The university is trying to move. It is trying to reduce things like its carbon footprint and so on. But it, like all big organisations, they're slow-moving leviathans. Students can push the institution. And so part of what you might do, I don't want to sow revolution, that's not necessarily my job, but there are lots of PhD students working on climate change. Do you have a network, apart from Cabot as your umbrella? Do you have a network? Why don't you use Cabot to form a network of climate change PhD students and then use that voice to push us? That's really what I'm saying, is that we need you to push us.
Yeah, and that's really where I'm at the moment. I've been on maternity leave, I've come back and I'm going, I'm not hearing it. Is it happening? Am I not aware? Or should I be helping to make it happen?
Some of it's happening, but maybe there's more that would happen.
Yeah.
If you...
Great.
Yeah. Mother Teresa, the old story about Mother Teresa, which is terribly, terribly trite, is people would often say to her, why are you helping these children? Why aren't you lobbying the government to make sure this poverty doesn't happen? And she says, it's a really good idea, why don't you go and do it?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to hang out with me.
Are there any other PhD climate change people in the room? If so, she wants a conversation afterwards. There was something actually that the Student Union organised. How long ago was it, the conference on student research? 2 years or 3 years ago. The Student Union organised a one-day event where students at every level, from PhD down to undergrad through to undergrad, could sign up to present their research around sustainable futures and all sorts of pieces of work. And there was a publication that came from it. It was a really interesting way of getting interested people together to take the next step. So that would be quite easy to do. Cabot, I suspect, you might even find Cabot would give you some money to do that. Our experience, whilst you're doing that, our experience is when students ask, if I rock up in a department in the university and say, what about doing X? Oh God, it's her again. If students rock up, and Hannah did a lot of this in her early days when she was a master's student, just going into schools and saying, what could you do about this? And people go, oh, well, do you know, nobody's ever asked us to think about it. That's a really good question. And then started doing stuff. So it's not that there's a resistance, it's a, kind of, we all need to be prompted.
Hi, I work in professional services, so I'm on the other side of the fence, not the student side, but I also work in education services, so I'm fairly aware that the university values its autonomy and we don't have like a top-down dictatorial way of running things. But yesterday I listened to last week's lecture.
Yeah, one of the first ones.
About a sustainable future. And the speaker said that the best thing that we can do is to lobby people above us, organisations, and I just wonder when the university is going to start having more of a top-down strategy about being sustainable, because I don't think we should have to do the lobbying. I think the university should implement policies that say you don't have a choice about whether or not your coffee comes in a teacup or a plastic cup. It's coming in a teacup. Your printing will be double-sided. Your lights will be censored ones, not tungsten filament or whatever, because I don't want to have to Google it myself.
Okay, some of that is happening. So in large parts of the university now, printing is double-sided as the default, for example. And when they're doing refits, they are changing. There's an estates issue about how much you can do, how fast, and raising the money to do it. But there is an estates strategy. So the physical plant bit is not such a worry. And it's coming, but you can put pressure to make it come faster, because the university, believe it or not, there is strong evidence that university prioritises spending according to what students say they want. You know, most of the money comes from you, so you are a real force. The thing about more generally bottom-up or top-down, there is a movement that says that universities should do this from the top down. I'm not a supporter of that for a number of reasons. Firstly, because when the top does it, they get a solution and we're all going to do it. Whereas if you believe a sustainable future is about a multiplicity of answers, what I'm wanting to do is to encourage innovation and excitement. And I've seen staff all over the university and students all over the university do really wacky, exciting things that are transformative things because they're countercultural. The minute it becomes what we all have to do, and we saw this to some extent with the creation of Bristol Futures, that you give power to the blockers. And there are some people who are blockers to this sort of change. And if we make it official, and they're sitting in an official seat, they can block the way. So, for example, on one of our staff workshops that we do around sustainability, we had some quite young members of staff from a school who better remain anonymous because they're recording, who said, we really want to do something, but our head of school is not supportive of us doing more on sustainability in the curriculum. Now, if it's an official approach, that person's going to sit there as a blocker. We run a small fund called the Green Apple Fund, and those members of staff came to us and said, this is what we'd like to do. Could we have a grant from the fund? And we gave them a grant of 900 quid, I think it was. And then they went to the head of school and said, we've got 900 quid to do this. And at that point, the head of school went, isn't that fantastic? I can say that's education innovation in my school. And that sort of work makes it much easier to deal with the blockers.